Soon now I am to tell you something about the beginning of the Colebrook Fire Department. I noticed in looking at the old records, unfortunately, we have all of the old fire department records back to the date that the fire precinct was organized. To those of you who do not know what the fire precinct is, it originally was petitioned by 52 members of the people living in the congested, we'll say, area of Colebrook. And they wanted to have perhaps better fire protection. Of course, in those days, back in 1870, 1880, there were no roads plowed around here at all, which is hard for some of you to imagine. The big roller, used to roll the roads outside of town. And of course, the fire department in those days had no motorized apparatus anyway. The earliest that we had was an old chisel car that Norman Parks built over into a small, almost pickup truck type that we could haul some hose in around town. But going back to its inception, I find in this original book right here, and I possibly would want someone to pass it around so you could see the original writing in here, where they petitioned the selectmen to set aside a portion of the town as a fire precinct. And as I stated earlier, the intent was to make it possible to have fire equipment. They were apparently willing to spend extra money here, although as you look through these books, you found that they were reluctant to spend money for anything in those days. Time and time again, I find in looking through the annual meeting for the election of officers and the raising of money, that when it comes to that article on paying the firemen, how much will they raise to pay the firemen, they passed over that article, decided they didn't need any pay. Well, for years, of course, when I first went on, they paid the firemen $1 a call or $1 an hour. And that was standard for many, many years. And then they got it up $2 an hour with inflation. And from now they've got it up to the point where they're paying $3 an hour. And nobody says anything whether it's $1 or $3. They just take it as a part of inflation that we're living in. Going back again to the beginning of this book, you see it's coming to pieces, Patty, and I would like someone to pass it around and see what kind of writing they had in those days. And I'll tell you, you won't look at it long before you get the willies just looking at it, because I don't think you'll be able to read it. But once you look at that, you'll be determined that one of the things you're going to learn to do as time goes on is perhaps write just a little bit better. Or if you're going to take a job as a secretary, you're sure going to want to write a little bit better. And, of course, the school teacher would interpret it very, very quickly. The selectmen followed the request, and the precinct was organized in early 1880. And after that, each year, the fire precinct met on the fourth Thursday of March each year and had their annual meeting. As I look through another book, I think Old Timer here Earl says, to us he's known as Old Timer. And that has a record of all of the old fires, the old original book that we kept. And I don't know of many town records that go back that far. That will show you one of the reasons why they were anxious to have a better fire protection, because you look down over that list and fire after fire, you'll see after it total loss. Total loss. Whether it was stores, whether it was houses, barns, no matter what it was a total loss. They had no way except the bucket brigade, and usually there was no water available even for a bucket brigade. Although in those days we did have a few watering troughs around where they watered their horses and you could haul water, carry water from. As I stated earlier, the first piece of motorized apparatus was an old Kissel car. That's a car that went off the market, well, I guess nearly 50 years ago. It was made over and we could haul a little hose on. But even in those days, the only item we had to put out fire with was soda and acid and water. Now that soda and acid mixed together with the water would develop a pressure. And with that, with just a small hose, we would have something under pressure for just a few minutes, maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes, and then that would be done. And then we'd have to wait till we could recharge it again. Now to haul our hose with, we had just a hand cart, two-wheel hand cart, and I think we had 2 or 3 of them, but no quantity of hose at all. As the present time of all types of hose, we must have more than 2 miles of hose now. And that's one of the reasons for our success as a fire department, that we have built up to the point where that probably few departments in the state are equal in getting out and getting the fires, and not only that, but getting the fires out. Very few of the buildings here in town that have caught fire lately. I'm speaking of larger buildings, like LaPearl's apartment building up the top of Cooper Hill. Now that fire never got outside of the building. Of course, the fire was coming out the windows when we got there. But within a matter of 1 to 2 minutes, we had firemen going inside that building with their Scott packs on. And speaking of Scott packs, I don't know how many of you are familiar with them or not, but it's pretty like the packs that scuba divers use in going underwater to recover things, to explore the bottom of the ocean and so forth. But these packs permit you to be inside of a building for about 30 minutes until that tank is exhausted. They're 30-minute tanks. Some of the tanks will not last 30 minutes with some of them in. It all depends on the exertion they're putting into hauling the hose around or whatever they're doing inside. And if they're breathing a little bit harder, it'll use up that tank in, some will use up the tank in 25 minutes, or others will make it go nearly to 30 minutes. It all depends on the amount of exertion that they put into it. Now, over a period of time, I noticed different things that the fire precinct did that I had forgotten about. And one of them was they raised something like $100 or $150, and it got up to $300 as time went on, to sprinkle the streets. Of course, we never had such a thing as a tarred road. I don't know if they had tarred roads. Well, if they did, I don't know where they were. But all of our state roads, for example, used to be only just dirt roads and dusty. But in town, they decided we can have the streets sprinkled once or twice a day. That'll help out, keep the dust down. And storekeepers were all for it because the dust was continually getting into their buildings. And in those days, another interesting thing, and I think probably old Timer will bring that out when he tells one of his experiences at an Earl fire. On Main Street, the stores were always getting dusty inside and out, and so to wash those plate glass windows, they had, perhaps a little freer with water than they are nowadays. They had bored little holes at the bottom of the sash of the plate glass windows, so that about as big around as your finger, and if they had an excessive amount of water inside, to just run out the side from that onto the sidewalk. Plus, when I first came here in 1919, as I recall it, they didn't have much in the way of sidewalks here, even then. I remember it was the latter part of March, very muddy, and as I trudged up from the station, I had the job keeping out of the mud, and I hadn't sort of realized what I would be getting into. And, along those same lines of interest, when we got to Lancaster, the trainman went through and said, everybody out, the train goes over to Coos Junction. Well, I knew I'd got to go through Coos Junction to come to Colebrook. So I said, most every junction has got a good eating place right there in the station anyway. So I came up to Coos Junction, only to find that if I wanted anything to eat, I had to walk back to Lancaster. So I decided to go hungry. I think in going down through the list of items and memoranda that I made, among the first fire wardens that we had was Jesse Cooper, Gus Remick, and Warren Drew. Another thing that they did in those days also, they raised money for lighting the streets, apparently mainly Main Street. And I don't know whether they were gas lights, Harry, kerosene lights. Well, they raised $50, I noticed, to hire somebody to go around in the evening, and that's what he got for the year, and light these kerosene lights that so they had some sort of a light along Main Street. I was a little bit amazed at that, too. Now, in 1881, they raised $1,000 to buy the first apparatus that they had, and that was what we call old Mohawk hand pumper. Now, I don't know whether any of you have been in the station over there. It's in the back of the station, and it's the one that you had to pump by hand, and it had to be hand drawn also. And we could pull up to a stream like the Mohawk, but we didn't go out of town because the way we had of getting it out of town was to, as we did once or twice, like up to Greenwood's Mill. Now, Greenwood's Mill is up toward Beaverbrook Falls. And we went up there to a house fire once. We went up there to the time it was Middlesbrough. Now, we had to gather at the fire station, which is there, which was where the laundromat is now. we gathered there, and we said, well, how are we ever going to get up there? We can't haul that up by hand way up there. And so we waited around 15, 20 minutes. Of course, the place was all burning at the time, and finally somebody came along with a team, and we asked if they would haul us up to Greenwood's Mill. And so we got on behind this, just in the winter time, on behind this sled, and they hauled us up to the Greenwood's Mill. Well, the only good we could do was keep other buildings from burning around there, because by the time we got there, it was so far gone, there was nothing we could do. Another instance of that I noticed going down through the records. I found once that we were called to go up to Canaan, but that's when we had one truck then. And they had called Pittsburgh, they had called Beecher Falls and Stewartstown that had small departments then. And I noticed in the records that we were there first, in spite of the fact that we had to stop on the way and change a tire. And, but now we never think about tires because they seem to last better than they used to in those days. Another thing of interest was that we had another call up to Canaan. And we said, well, I noticed the minutes said we made a record run to get to Canaan and to help out what we could. And the record time was 50 minutes in getting up to Canaan. Well, now you think of it maybe as 10 minutes. But those days, trucks or cars or any vehicle, I don't think they were invented to go a mile a minute in those days. All of it was very interesting. I learned quite a lot by going through these old records myself. And that $1,000 that they raised apparently purchased an old, what we call it, Mohawk number 1. That's right. That you draw by hand. That's right. And I have to refer to my records here often because so much of it is items with dates. Another thing they voted was to $50 to have a watering trough placed at a certain spot in town because it looked like a strategic place to get water in case of a major fire. That was back in 1891. And then the only water we had to go by at that time was a small water system that was built by my wife's grandfather and George Washington Annis. I don't know where they got the name from, but of course, those days it was George Washington was the well-known name, and it was a famous name to name all Negroes, I suppose, from. He supplied water to standpipes while they could the sprinklers. I don't know whether any of you remember what the old sprinklers looked like. Probably you don't.
We talked about it last night.
That's right. That's right. He did the sprinkling for quite a number of years, and Bert Coble did for a short time also. Oh yes, it was. It looks a good deal like these milk truck tanks that you see hauling. Well, let me see. Gorman has one, but not as large as that because it's hauled by 2 horses, and they paid them anywhere from $100 a year. I don't see how they can make any money doing it, but I suppose it gave them a little extra spending money. And Free Coble always had a bunch of horses around anyway. And I noticed a number of years down through here that they voted to pay the firemen nothing. Well, then going into the 1890s to 1900, there was an era of about 10 years there when some people realized that with the town growing and having bad fires, that we've got to do something in order to protect the property here in town. So they had an article in the warrant to see if they could find somebody that would put in a hydrant system. And that was in year after year, and they would pass over that article because they knew it was going to cost quite a lot of money to get that done. I don't know when the first hydrants were put in. You know, I think it had to be probably right around 1900. And I was amazed that it did take quite a lot of water, of course. And some years they raised $600 to pay the water rent. Then other years, when that article come up, they would vote to have his water, but at the same time they'd vote not to pay him anything for it. Well, of course he.
What did he do about that?
Nothing. Just kept on, and then some years they'd vote to pay him. But nowadays, if that happened, why there'd be a lawsuit, of course, pretty quick. Of course, they also raised in 1895. I noticed they raised $200 to have an engineer to investigate what it would cost to put in a water system. Of course, the original water system that was put in to supply the standpipes here and a lot of houses was small reservoirs up on the hill here, well, just above the school up here, and that worked out pretty well. But then when they put in the hydrant system, they built a dam up above Beaverbrook Falls, and then they built a reservoir up on the hill here that would fill from that dam on Beaverbrook Falls, and they engineered it so perfectly that the reservoir would not run over. So for years, I know that dam was up there above Beaverbrook Falls, and it's only within probably 20 years that they put in the pumping system down here. A little more than 20 years ago, that the water now for the reservoir is pumped out of driven wells down back of where Willett Nugent lives.
We don't drink that water at all.
Oh no. There's no distinction between the water that goes into the water goes up into the reservoir, and yes, you drink that water in the reservoir, it's just the same. But it does not come from Beaverbrook any longer. That is entirely shut off. But it's the water that we drink now is chlorinated by a chlorinated plant or process down at the little pumping station back of Nugent's house. And of course, one of the things that I would like to see done is that present reservoir up here fenced in with I call it a page wire fence. I think it should be, but they never got around to do it yet. Well, I'm going right down through here, 1896, 97, 98, 99, 100. No money raised for firemen, but a little money raised to sprinkle the streets. More people breathed the dust, I guess, and so they were willing to sprinkle the streets in those days. I think probably I'd like to go now to some of the fires that we may have had that made quite an impression on me. Because the first time I went on to the fire company was September in 1920, September 1st. And about 10 days after it was on, we had our first fire call that I had while I was on. That was up to the old fairground. And I don't know whether you know where the old fairgrounds was, but the old fairgrounds was up where the hospital is now. And I know that Joe Rosai was carting off a little rubbish there with his pickup, and somebody dropped a match in the rubbish, and of course they called the fire department to come up and try and put that out. That was only a minute's job. And then another one, a fire that I think probably was as hard a fire, as long a fire as I ever went to, was the one up to Beecher Falls lumber yard. Because then the lumber yard that supplied the factory had 2 to 3 million feet of sawed lumber, besides a lot of logs. And we were called, that was on a Sunday, we were called along in the middle of the forenoon, because they were afraid, very definitely afraid that the factory was going. So we went up there, but we had, of course, only our chemical cart that we could do any good with. And that day, I don't know how many hours we used the chemical wagon, but we used every bit of soda that we had in the fire station. We got all the soda in Pittsburgh, Beecher Falls, Stewartstown, Stratford, and from the stores in Colebrook to try to keep that truck going. And we managed to keep the factory from catching on fire, although the heat was intense. But probably one of the serious aspects of that particular fire was it did delay production for quite a while at the factory, because they were unable to get the lumber to keep going until they could get more logs and get them sawed out. But during the fire, well, they had hot coffee around for different ones to drink, and there was one man that came along, and he could not speak English. He was of French extraction and apparently from Hereford, and he saw this cup that looked like hot coffee there, and he picked it up and took about 2 swallows, and that was it. It turned out to be this acid that was what was burning his stomach. Well, we immediately gave him some soda and water, see if it wouldn't counteract it, and it did have the effect of counteracting enough so that he lived, which was an amazing thing. But it just sat there on ready to use in the next charge of the extinguisher. And after that, we watched it a little more closely. I remember, speaking of fires, I remember one that we went to up to Pittsburgh. I think that was either in January or early February. But I know Leonard Van Horn and I were on the back end of that truck, and the thermometer was 30 below that morning. And we were trying to put arms over that rod to hang on and try and warm our ears with the other. We had just it was the middle of the day when it happened. We had on just go to work clothes, and every few minutes Leonard would say, "I can't hang on any longer. I've got to fall off." And I said, "No, you can't fall off. I'd say, I don't think I can hold on any longer either." Water out of the tree, we could lift as a limit how high you could lift water. The farther higher you get above sea level, the lower the distance that you can lift water. But, it took the first thing, and we had water, 3 houses had burned then. And the fourth was just starting, and we had water to put that house, so it didn't get any further. And that's one of the times that things got worked perfectly for us, except for the 2 riders on back here. And we weren't equipped for that. Of course, another one that I remember very distinctly was when the town hall was in. And that was I think the warm weather. But I was up on the ladder on the end of Bridge Street, and with the hose, trying to keep it wet enough inside so the belfry would not cave in. But that's where our fire alarm is on top of that belfry. But then all of a sudden, those timbers let go. When it did, that ladder just went right back like that. And it just stood on end for almost 10 or 15 minutes. And I was trying to think, well, now if it's right on board, what's going to happen to me? And I said, how am I going to, I can't jump too far. And how am I going to get out of this one? So I figured that perhaps if I was quick enough, started going that way, I could swing around onto the back side of the ladder so I would be on top of it. Perhaps I could slide half the way down, only hit the ground. But it held there for just about 15 seconds. And then all of a sudden it put back into place. So I got out of that scrape. Better than I did some of the others, because over a period of time, I don't know. I have no idea what I have do with it. Because a lot of times, working around the acid, I get a little spatter of it, just a little spatter of it, and that'll keep the cloth, keep your clothes, like that. Then again, get wet, because the early part of my being on, we had no coat, no fire coat, as we do today. We had no fire helmet to stop falling timbers hitting us on the head. We had no boots, unless we have to have a pair on at home, and or at home when the fire occurred, then we have to slip on a pair to protect us a little bit. I know on several occasions broken roofs, both sides, and getting jammed and caught with heavy timbers, which gets me when something caved in. Another time, I got my left arm broken out to a fire out to just above the road of Cummins Farm on the Diamond Palm Road. That's when the big timber come down from the farm, and I jumped in time so it missed my head. Fortunately, I didn't be here today. And, another time, timber caught me and split my head open. still here today. And if I have my health, I plan to be here, be on the fire department. My aim is about a year and a half more. In other words, I want to retire after 55 and a half years of service. But I gotta watch my talk here right now. I do want Harry to tell you about a few of the fires that occurred back around the turn of the century, see. And because Harry, our old timer who was brought up around this area, and he saw a few of them, like the ones that lead Main Street right up through, and took out the grammar school up here. The one right there, the all burned to death. And I'm going to let Harry talk to you for a few minutes, and I want to get time in here also for Bradford Brooks to demonstrate how he puts on a Scott pack, because Scott packs now are one of the big assets that the fire department has. We have around 10 or 12 that the younger men who are trained to wear them, because it's a younger man's game inside. And he will demonstrate in a few minutes as soon as old timer finishes telling you about several fires that he remembers very much about. July 1960, back before most of you were born. I wasn't happy to tell you anything about any of the fires that have happened in the town over the last, say, 35 or 40 years. But I would like to refer to the Colebrook House fire, which was in 1899. I was janitor at the congregation church, and at some particular meeting, I looked out the window on that side, and the whole subdivision was 25 or 30 feet, all ablaze. And they didn't have any signal for fires in town at that particular time. So I began to ring the bell. I rang the bell for probably a half hour to get the town out. And the building was completely lost. We turned back into the cellar and left one or two or three chimneys standing. Then at short time after that, the Ramsey Brothers building was across the road where what we call the old Houseman Theater. And now it's occupied by Lambert store. At that particular time, there was one large general store building, and then there was a building on the corner where the Hicks building sat down now, and those are the two buildings that were lost at that particular time. In 1901, had a fire that started in what is known as the Hill Drugstore Barn. That was behind Montgomery Moore store at the present time. The fire, we call it, run both ways. Burnt every building from the Montgomery store through to the Hicks house. And the Hicks from the Montgomery store through to the farmer's and over towards Ellen Stick. And everything was burned. We had no water whatever to fight the fire there. I remember that I helped run the old company. The old company was directly in the Mohawk River right down the Phoenix store. Then the next big fire that we had was what is known as Patty Acre. Patty Acre was known then from Scott Hardware store through to the Rennick building. All those buildings Then, of course, later on, we had a tremendous fire, forest fire, which started about a mile up City Street from Joe Everett's cottage down to the valley. That giant event was some before the coast that lived in the town of Columbia in the farming area, loaded all of their furniture into hay racks and lumber wagons, ready to move out in case the building burned. They told me at that time that it was just dark around where the fire was, and it would be at night. And the earth was probably 12 to 15 miles along City Street over in the direction of Transit Ball. Then, of course, we had the forest fire, which started at the corner of the elementary school building next to the medic building, and burned 4 buildings there besides the elementary school house. That was in 1903. We have been very fortunate over the years not to have had any live jobs during the fire. We accepted the 3. One was a fire that was burned in the house opposite the last residence on Spring Street, and the opposite side of the road. I don't recall the name of the building. And then the old government forest fire was burned after the Hits fire about 1903. Then, several years afterwards, now that lost his life down in the little residence he had out in the garden house. I don't recall one of those 2. Yes, that is true, but he didn't die in the fire. I think we were very, very fortunate all these years not to have in the nest, because we often read that these fires all over the country, when anywhere from 1 or 2 or 3 dozens of folks lost their lives in these fires. Especially, I think, by the heavy smoke that is inside rather than being burned to death. I wouldn't attempt now to tell you how long I have been on the fire subject. These people here, these young fellows, that couldn't have the secrets and figured out for yourself the right thing. So I did. 1906. I don't say that I would stay, not more than 12 or 15 or 25 years longer, but I've enjoyed it, and we've always had a very, very agreeable crowd to work with. You see, there's been no complaint. Well, now, second old timer over there, gives gas. They are away. And there's no criticism. When they have been out, especially in the winter, and fire station was hoses that were being frozen, moving, and when they began to hang them up or leave them on the floor over the fire station for them to show out, there never was any question on it. Why didn't you fight the fire differently? They always took into consideration that the officers of the company knew that what to do, and there was no criticism. So we always got along very well. Now, I won't take up any more of your time because I know we have a lunch hour. I don't know whether we'll be invited to lunch with you. Not, but I would just say that I'm very glad to come here and really offer you a very small explanation of some of the things we do. Before I introduce Patrick Brooks, who's our spot pack specialist, and he's the one in charge of organizing the men who will be wearing the spot pack. I did want to mention a little bit more about the fire department itself. Over a period of years, we have been able to, build the backlog of the department out of men who work right along Main Street and or close to Main Street. Because of that, we have a group that can get out very quickly when we call. I remember not but a few years ago, within 4 or 5 years ago, someone was here from the fire marshal's office in Colebrook, and they were standing over by the Hicks Hardware. The alarm sounded, and he said, "What's that, a fire?" And they said, "Yes." They took out his watch, and it was just 39 seconds before the first truck came out of the station. And he wouldn't believe it. But generally speaking, we will be on the road within a minute after that whistle blows. And I catch it because all the firemen are equipped with radios now, special radios that the announcement comes over that radio. At the same time, they pull the switch that sounds the alarm, telling where the fire is, what it is, and that gives us a pretty good idea of what we've got on our hands before we even leave town. Now, yes. It has its advantages and disadvantages. I know Lebanon, for example, has 3 men on duty, but that means probably 9 to a dozen men, because there'll be 3 on for 8 to 10 hours, and then you've got to have 3 more, and sort of carry over into the 2 weekends, into the weekends. We've got, or you have them on too many hours. But I can recall back maybe, time goes so, it's hard to remember definitely, but within 15 or 20 years, that they had a fire there in Lebanon. And they sent the truck and the 2 men went to the truck through the fire. The 3rd man stayed at the station in case anything else came up. When they got there, they found that the wind was blowing hard and the building was burning. They probably couldn't handle it alone. So they called back and said, "We've got to have a lot more help." But before that help came, the entire business section of Lebanon was burned out. Because so many of the men worked in the mills, get word to them so they could get to the fire station, and it was unfortunate. I don't think it would help here too much. We'll be coming to that one of these days, though. I feel sure, but it won't be one man. It'll have to be, if you have just one man at the station, as they do in some places. Quite a number of places have 1 or 2 men full time. But that means, as I said before, a number of men, that they can't work 24 hours around the clock. Now, at this time, I wanted to mention one thing more. Each year, at our pay night meeting in November, we have a nomination of officers by secret ballot for the coming year. That is, the captains of the 4 companies, the chief, and the 2 assistant chiefs, and as well as the clerk. That is done by secret ballot. And then in December, we have the election, which is done by secret ballot also. And January 1st, they take over. That way, if they're dissatisfied with any particular man, say with anybody in public office, he's on the way out. And consequently, everybody stays on a while. I hope they're satisfied. If not, they would oust me pretty quick. I know that. But as I say, I've got another year and a half, then I'll be retiring, and because I don't feel that I should do some of the chiefs have in the past. Stay off until they get rid of the bird. I think it's a younger man's game. I'm retired. Now, I'd like to add the work of the Public Service Company, who is a training officer on Scotland, and he will tell you and perhaps demonstrate to you how easy it is what on this track. He will do it slowly so that you get some idea of what to do. Are we running over time? Okay. Changed a lot in recent years. The men have to be equipped differently today to do the job. Make me a little like this. The temperature of the air here in the sea was out of the breeze. Any old flesh that you have, would be very, very easy. Yes, that situation, first thing we had boots. These boots have steel insoles and insoles stuff on the nails. Yeah, steel holes that they're hip boots. So we cover our legs. Like that. And they keep our feet dry and our clothes protected to some extent, but basically they're for mechanical protection. So we have padding in here too to prevent injury to the shin. It's not the woody window of the burning building. We have coats like this that hit our canvas. They have multiple liners inside that are waterproof to prevent the water from getting in. But basically, that protects us against the heat. The most severe heat that we can be confronted with. They're hot to work in. They do a great job. Buttoned up tightly. Pulling around the neck. Collars turned up. And we do have a flat heel. We'll leave that unbuttoned for us. We have to wear helmets. I wear my public service. And then I don't continue using it. This is the day for the birthday
Open now. This is a regulator, drops the pressure down 2,200, 3 or 4 pounds. Now, you may have trouble hearing that, but this is on. I'll put it on shortly, and then I'll take it off. Frank, can you hear me? Okay. We take control of it. Pulling off the phone and reading it. When you read out the phone, every time I breathe in, I come through. When I stop breathing, I have to breathe. A little pocket. We need a light to keep the heat away from my nose and find my face. That could be actually hat, but in the summertime I usually hat without it. Put it on something. And then we're going to wear gloves. This protects our hands from the heat and fire. We put something possible like that. And now, we're ready to go. We work in relative safety in an atmosphere that no human being could possibly exist in otherwise. So just like this, we've got 10 of these packs. All of our men have the boots, coats, and helmets. So we can put 10 men if we need to inside of a burning building to rescue people, to locate the fire, and to extinguish the fire. We've got about a dozen men, the younger fellows that have been trained and practiced and rehearsed and so forth with this equipment. We need to stop that. There's a lot of work to be done outside the fire at the same time. Getting the hose lines ready, hooking up to the pumps and the water, getting ladders up and opening up windows. So that plenty of work for men to do outside. Right. Okay. Good boy. We have a built-in low pressure alarm, and when the air pressure drops down to about 400 pounds in the tank, I can simulate this. Now, as I breathe, the pressure in my line will drop, and this alarm will turn. We've got about 4 minutes, and this alarm will keep ringing. It won't die out like this. Yes, you can hear it yourself.
connection. There's a difference in people. He may have been a very rugged man, and of course, if you're a rugged man, he naturally would last longer than somebody else that was not as rugged. I can remember the first of our having these tanks. They did not have a bell alarm on it, and I was wearing one in the with the James, I think Barnett had it at the time, grain store down here, but it's I assume now I am to tell you something about the beginning of the Colebrook Fire Department. I noticed in looking at the old records, unfortunately, we have all of the old fire department records back to the date that the fire precinct was organized. To those of you who do not know what the fire precinct is, it originally was petitioned by 52 members of the people living in the congested, we'll say, area of Colebrook. And they wanted to have perhaps better fire protection. Of course, in those days, back in 1870, 1880, there were no roads plowed around here at all, which is hard for some of you to imagine. The big roller, used to roll the roads outside of town. And of course, the fire department in those days had no motorized apparatus anyway. The earliest that we had was an old chisel car that Norman Parks built over into a small, almost pickup type truck type that we could haul some hose in around town. But going back to its inception, I find in this original book right here, and I possibly would want someone to pass it around so you could see the original writing in here, where they petitioned the selectmen to set aside a portion of the town as a fire precinct. And as I stated earlier, the intent was to make it possible to have fire equipment. They were apparently willing to spend extra money here, although as you look through these books, you found that they were reluctant to spend money for anything in those days. Time and time again, I find in looking through the annual meeting for the election of officers and the raising of money, that when it comes to that article on paying the firemen, how much will they raise to pay the firemen? They passed over that article, decided they didn't need any pay.